the More Than Numbers podcast.
Hello and welcome to the More Than Numbers in Conversation podcast. I am thrilled to be joined today for our budget special with Stephen Cook from Howard Wright, a chartered financial planner. We are filming this the day after the Chancellor Rachel Reeves stood up and gave her budget. So this is the 27th of November, the day after. We've been scouring the documents the night before to try and bring you all of the key headlines and the things that you need to know. But I should say the devil's always in the details, so there will be more to come from this. But Stephen, do you want to just give us a bit of a background to you and Howard Wright?
So I'm Stephen Cook. I'm a chartered financial planner, and I work for Howard Wright Limited. We're based in Codsall in Wolverhampton, and as Alex said, we're a firm of chartered financial planners.
Great to have you with us, because I know a lot of our clients and people watching will want to know what your thoughts are. Really interesting day yesterday. We were watching it, and indeed, even before the Chancellor stood up, due to the Office of Budget Responsibilities administrative error, we seem to all know what was in the budget. So it was a really interesting day. Having said that as well, there was a lot of briefing in the run-up to the budget, so lots of things had been spoken about. But what was your initial reaction when the Chancellor stood down, when you kind of absorbed what she said? What was your initial thought process?
I thought the announcements, they weren't as bad as perhaps first thought. There was a lot of speculation building up to budget day in terms of the changes that might be made. And I think really, it perhaps wasn't too many changes or significant changes there. So yeah.
And I think certainly a lot of changes that aren't happening immediately, which equally makes it quite difficult for our viewers and listeners to understand. These headline figures of, and we'll come on to it, pension salary sacrifice, aren't happening tomorrow. They're years down the line. So it's kind of making sure people understand that. So if we start with businesses, I don't think there was too much announced for business. I think one of the key things that the Chancellor announced yesterday was this 40% first year allowance for main rate assets. This is capital allowances we're talking about here. That's actually taking place from the 1st of January 26. Couple of caveats to that and things that aren't included. Cars, second-hand assets won't qualify for it, and a slight quirk on assets that are bought to be leased overseas as well, not qualifying. But the vast majority of main rate assets will qualify for that 40% first year allowance. But then the main rate writing down allowance, which is currently at 18%, is being reduced to 14%. But that's coming in from April 26. The other thing that wasn't announced, we picked it up in the budget documents, is this very attractive 100% first year allowance for electric vehicles. That has been extended another year, so ending 2027 now. But one of the things that I know you've spoken about a lot recently is the national minimum wage, national living wage. This was actually announced the day before the budget and confirmed by government and those increases. Can you just give us a bit of background to that and what the changes are?
So both the national living wage and minimum wage are increasing. So the national living wage for workers 21 and over, increasing from £12.21 an hour to £12.71 an hour, and the minimum wage for 18 to 20 year olds increasing from £10 an hour to £10.85. It's an increase to those wages, which again, it's adding to the cost of employing those individuals.
Yeah, and that's something that's really hitting businesses. We've seen those employment numbers dropping recently with recent published figures from government. And actually this is going to make it even harder and more costly. And how do they pass those costs on, if indeed they can, to customers? So that is certainly going to hit those costs for businesses. Some changes that you picked up on EOTs, do you just want to see it? So that's an employee ownership trust, quite attractive route for people in terms of exiting businesses, but do you want to just pick up on some of those changes?
Yeah, that's right. So the capital gains tax relief on employee ownership trusts will be reduced from 100% down to 50%. So like you say, was an attractive way of perhaps business owners exiting the business. So those reliefs have pretty much halved there. So yeah, it's going to be more planning around that in terms of that exit strategy for those business owners.
Absolutely. But moving on to personal taxes and some of those big personal headlines, because that seemed to be quite a big portion of this budget, was personal taxes. How do we raise those whilst without getting political, not breaking any manifesto commitments? And I think that kind of freezing the thresholds rather than increasing rates, if we talk about income tax, was something that was quite cleverly done there. We'd almost been prepped for an increase in income tax rates, but we seem to, the government backtracked on that. But what they did do was freeze those thresholds, which people often hear stealth tax, fiscal drag. Can you just explain what that means in real terms for individuals?
That's it. So whilst those thresholds are maintained and frozen now until 2030, 2031, so they won't increase. So the amount that you can earn tax-free and in that basic rate of tax as well and upwards have remained level. So if you imagine that your income hopefully increases each year, you are then paying potentially more tax each year because those thresholds have been maintained. So as you say, not a headline increase to tax, but it is a self-tax because over those years you're probably expected to pay more.
Yeah,
in
more
tax.
people are going to be dragged into those tax thresholds, aren't they?
That's right.
But some changes for dividend tax, and that is coming in from April 26, so that is coming in from the next tax year, an increase to those dividend taxes. So what are those rates now going to be from April 26?
Yeah, so there's a 2% increase in those for the ordinary rate, which is increasing to 10.75%, and also the upper rate of 35.75%, and no changes to the additional rate, which is currently 39.35%. So increases to those taxes on dividends.
Which I think for small business owners, a lot of who get their income from their businesses via dividends, maybe it's more thought process into whether that's the most tax efficient way of doing that.
Absolutely.
But changes to property tax and interest, tax on interest, so tax on savings effectively, coming in from April 27. So what are those rates going to be that people are going to have to think about now?
Yeah, so again, for both of those, a 2% increase across the tax bands. So for both income savings and also property income, these are increasing from to 22%, 42% and 47% across those tax bands.
So lots of things for people to think about there, but just important to say on interest income, any interest that's earned on an ISA, and we'll talk about that now, is still tax-free. That hasn't changed.
That's right. So yeah, your ISA, that as a tax wrapper, allows you your money or your capital to grow tax-free. So that's been maintained in terms of the ISA. The ISA allowance has been maintained as well, so that's £20,000 each tax year that you can pay into an ISA. And what is changing though from 2027 is that the ISA or the cash ISA allowances for under 65s will reduce to £12,000 a year, and those that are over 65 from 2027 will maintain that £20,000 cash ISA allowance.
So the idea behind that is to get people investing more, encouraging that investment, but quite difficult for people on the street to understand sometimes what the risks are to investing, what the best products are. So I think there's going to have to be quite a lot of education around that. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. So if you're putting your capital into investment markets, you are exposing yourself to investment risk. So yeah, there's as you say, a lot of education around that will be needed. And perhaps it might be for those individuals, it might be the first time that they've been exposed to that market risk. So yeah, it's not the same as investing or putting your money in a cash ISA, where you're pretty much guaranteeing the value of that investment, and it increases by its interest. You're at the mercy of the markets in terms of what value that asset is worth.
Yeah, and making sure you think about what you want that cash for, what you want that savings for, and how best to utilise that. To talk about pensions, which is often what people think they come to a chartered financial planner for. So we'll talk about the obvious thing that was announced in the budget about salary sacrifices, but there were a couple of things that weren't announced in the budget that perhaps had been murmured in the run up to it that you picked up on. Can you just clarify what those are?
Yeah, so lots of speculation on whether pension tax-free cash rules would be changed, or that rule completely removed. But essentially, nothing was announced on those, and those tax-free cash limits on the pension have remained the same. So 25% of your pension pot, when you're able to access it, can be still be taken as a tax-free lump sum. And also, contributions going into the pension with tax relief will remain on those contributions as well. So no changes there.
So talking about the big headline, this change to salary sacrifice pensions and the tax relief that people get on that, and I think it's important to say the national insurance contribution tax relief that people get on that, not coming in until April 29. So we're talking about pension salary sacrifices above the 2,000. What does that mean for people in their pockets that they need to be thinking about as well?
Yeah, so I suppose any employee that is using the salary sacrifice rules to make pension contributions. For those contributions that will exceed £2,000 in the tax year, the national insurance contributions would have to be now paid, or from 2029 would have to be paid. So, yeah, we're planning around that to see whether those rules are still suitable to continue with. But what we've also got to take into account as well is that for employers who sometimes pass on the national insurance savings, they will have to pay that on those contributions over £2,000. So it's looking at whether those regimes are still suitable for those individuals.
And let's move on to inheritance tax now. Not too many announcements around inheritance tax, but obviously pensions, the segue in, I suppose, is that pensions are going to enter somebody's estate from 27. I think there's going to be a consultation on how that tax might be paid. We don't know the mechanics of that now. But any other changes to inheritance tax that you've picked up on? I think the big change was APR and BPR, so agricultural property relief and business property relief.
Yeah, so that was probably the biggest change announced. The £1 million allowance for business relief and agricultural relief. So if there's unused allowance there, it can be passed on to the spouse or civil partner in the event of death. So it's bringing it more in line with inheritance tax rules that are there at the moment, where you can pass on your unused allowances to your spouse or civil partner.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of planning and talk around that since last year's budget, when the big change to agricultural property relief and business property relief was announced, and I think it's welcome that is in line now with other reliefs that can be passed on. So really welcome.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and I suppose the big thing for inheritance tax as well is that, again, a lot of speculation going into budget day as to whether those reliefs, the nil rate bands, would be changed, or any changes to rules on gifting, but essentially nothing was mentioned, so those rules remain in place.
And then just talking about the state pension, I think that's going up, so there's a potential that people will be dragged into paying tax even if all they have is the state pension.
That's right. So it was announced that the basic and also the new flat rate state pension will increase by 4.8% from April 2026. As we mentioned when we talked about the income tax, with those allowances being frozen, the state pension, or the flat rate state pension there, will pretty much, well, in fact, it will exceed the personal allowance from April. So you're bringing more people into paying tax on their pensions, and there's going to be a consultation for those individuals where they've only got the state pension as to how they go about paying that tax
Yeah.
now without having to do a return.
I think the phrase is the easing the administrative burden, so we'll see what that looks like. The other headline announcements now, the electric vehicles from April 2028, there's going to be a 3p per mile charge for electric vehicles, or the usage of electric vehicles. I think the reason it's coming in from April 28 is that the government doesn't quite know how to administer that 3p per mile charge, and indeed there's going to be a consultation on that. But any thoughts on that announcement?
I suppose they're just trying to protect what comes into the Treasury. So they're pushing electric vehicles to kind of replace the traditional petrol and diesel cars, and if you've got less petrol and diesel cars, they're going to be receiving less in road tax. So it is almost a replacement for road tax, but specifically for electric vehicles.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other headline was this high value council tax surcharge. I think that, and perhaps the removal of the 2-child benefit cap, the most political points in the budget. So who is that going to affect, and when is it going to affect them?
Yeah, so I suppose the mansion tax, as they're calling it, for those properties valued at over £2 million. So there will be a surcharge on top of their council tax, which they pay at the moment. So properties valued over £2 million will pay a surcharge of £2,500, and that rises all the way up to properties valued over £5 million, which will pay £7,500 surcharge on that. So it's those properties which are valued over 2 million that are going to be affected, and that's from April 2028. And the removal of the 2-child benefit cap. So again, that will come in from April next year. So more children will get that, or I suppose families with children, more than 2 children, will get the additional benefits from that.
I mean, there's so many things that aren't coming in straight away, and we said that right at the beginning. So many things that are coming in staggered, sometimes beyond the life of this Parliament. So lots of things for people to consider. And again, we said right at the beginning, the devil is always in the detail with these things. Everybody has individual circumstances. So as far as I'm concerned, my advice is make sure you speak to your advisor, whether that be your accountant or your financial advisor. And often we find it works well if we're both in the room having that conversation as well. But we are here at CK, and I know Stephen and the team at Howard Wright are also there to help you navigate the changes and what might be right for you, because there's lots to take in there. But certainly an interesting budget, certainly one she's made a choice to tax, to then spend. So lots of things. But we are here, as I say, to help you navigate that. So thank you so much, Stephen, for coming on and explaining all of these things to us and talking us through that. We really, really appreciate it. Please do get in touch if you have any questions.
The More Than Numbers podcast.